Therefore, want to announce at this point that there have been further numbers of people who were part of this team who were found to have been positive. It will be noticed that these individuals had come in as couples, and therefore we had asked them to be on quarantine already at the time when the first one turned to be positive. So just to indicate at this point that 4 of them have also now tested positive. I'll try and give you a sense of how they are. One is a couple in KwaZulu-Natal, in the area around the Umgungundlovu area, 38-year-old male and female. They've tested positive. They have been put on quarantine, and they had not yet been admitted to hospital at the point when we received the results. So they are, some of them, in fact, the lady had symptoms on arrival, but the gentleman did not have symptoms, but the tests have come out to be positive. So we are therefore going to have our team to round up all the contacts and also follow up to see who else needs to be approached. They were all traveling together. The second group, another person is a 45-year-old male, again in the area of Maritzburg. Amongst those contacts, we took these tabs, the test at that time, and after those swabs were taken, they came back positive. At this moment, that one also has some symptoms, and therefore it was also put on quarantine. They will also have to go for assessment by the doctor and get admitted at that point. The next one is another female. It's another male who is in the area of Pietermaritzburg as well. So this one again is a 38-year-old male who has been found to also be positive. Those who we have not mentioned were still awaiting the results for them to come back, so that we now are announcing that we have those numbers of people who are now testing positive. We also had another one case that was of concern to us, because this was someone who was in Northwest, in Freiburg, and initially were admitted with some symptoms, but in the context then when the first test was done, it created an impression that it was a very unclear, maybe weakly positive, and it was not clear. So we're a bit concerned that there could have been another person testing positive, but in fact we have now got a confirmation that this one is negative. We're only mentioning that one so that you do not have stories that move around, and you could someone would say someone was isolated, treated in isolation in Freiburg, and then we might think that there's a case that we might be unaware of. Well, that's why we're mentioning it. But we are quite comfortable that this one, as the results have come back to say it was weak positive. Now, weak positive could be anything. I don't want to get into that, but sometimes weak positive could mean that there could have been a cross reaction with some other virus that was in the body because she was not well. But then once you do a confirmatory test, then you ignore what the issue was before. It just simply tells you that the test was undecided at that time, but later it confirms. So when the second confirmatory test comes along, then of course we work on that. So that is where we are, colleagues. We just want to say again that we will await the tests on the other outstanding members, and will announce them in due course. But just to be again upfront, that we are not surprised with these particular results. We think that the kind of exposure that these members had, if it was enough to create an infection in one person, it was most likely that all of them would have had a similar kind of exposure. We therefore believe that any positive report would not be a surprise. We'll wait for the others. What we are now focusing on is tracking all the contacts. As we indicated, we have already contacted a number of those who were located 2 seats ahead and 2 seats behind the flight, the seats of those who were flying with the first patient. So from that point of view, we are on course with finding out on all of those. And again, we've said that the approach on this matter is that if anyone is suspected, we then test them and note who the contacts are. Once the person becomes positive, we then test the contacts, and when the contacts are positive, we treat each one of them as at the center of the circle. Then we will then go and test each one's contacts, and then until we can get to a point where we break the circle of positive results. Then we will then stop following that particular lead, and then we'll follow those where the results become positive. So at the moment, we're still on course, and we're quite comfortable that this is at the moment a limited situation of, at least we know the people who are involved. Yes, to what extent this would have gone to the rest of the other members of the public is something that we have to track and, and make sure we take through. What I think would be of importance now is to say that the people who are getting infected are having an experience of having been to countries other than China, which means therefore that we need to be more vigilant, because the infection could come from any other aircraft, it could come from any airline, and what we have to start watching is the infection at some point will become an infection where it's a local transmission, which means beyond the one person who had come from outside. Now, our people locally are the ones that are transmitting the infection. That situation is what we are watching out for, and therefore we'll continue to test all of these contacts. And then as soon as we say you are a contact that needs to be tested, then of course we recommend you to be quarantined, and then we'll look at the circumstances of the individuals. At the moment, it has not arisen that there should be any intervention on the quarantine, because we think that those circumstances under which people are quarantined are actually acceptable. Just to make a distinction, quarantine is when you are healthy and we want to do a test, and then we want to find out if you do have the infection or not. Isolation is in hospital, where we treat you in an area which is secluded from all other patients, and then in the process we're treating you in a way where there's a particular code of how the nursing happens. You have to have a protective gear, and you have to have limitation of contact with other people and other patients, and so on and so on. So that's why we make that a bit of a distinction there. So as we have indicated, we've also got our teams here. We're going to ask that some of the questions they could respond to you, but we just want to give you that kind of update at this point. We would be willing to deal with your questions, but as we have said, a lot of decisions are still going to be made in the relevant line function and cabinet, so there may not be much more that we might want to raise or answer on these issues, but we are open to just advise you where we are on this matter. At this point, I'm not sure if my colleagues might want to add anything, and then at that point we would also just like you to ask your questions, and we'll share them with the teams that are managing this, particularly from the Department of Health and NICD, as well as DIRCO, where a number of the issues are arising from. But all of us are open to your questions. Thank you very much.